Hey everyone, what's going on? Mr. Harvey here. Let's continue our lecture on Chapter 9, the Enlightenment, and today we're going to be talking about Enlightened Despotism or Enlightened Absolutism. All right? Now, in today's lecture, I'm going to be talking about a couple of different things. I'm going to be talking about some of the major Enlightened absolute rulers who were influenced by the Enlightenment, some of the wars they were involved in, and then kind of just summarizing and summing up the entire Enlightenment and talking a little bit about this idea of liberalism that is associated with the Enlightenment. So let's get started, okay? Now, important for us to understand, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll be talking about this a little bit later, that many of the philosophers did not favor democracy. And the Enlightenment doesn't necessarily equate to democracy. And I'll be explaining that more at the very end of this lecture. But many philosophers favored monarchs. They favored absolutism. Hobbes, a really good example of that. Voltaire is a really good example of that. They didn't necessarily want to limit the power of the monarchs. Montesquieu does, right? Checks and balances. Okay, he wants to, have different branches being able to, have different types of power within a government. A lot of philosophers did not argue for that. And instead, many of them actually favored enlightened absolutism. And a really good example of that is Voltaire. He favored, absolute rulers who embraced and indoctrinated some of the reforms of the Enlightenment. And we have three examples. We got Frederick, the Great of Prussia, Joseph of Austria, and Catherine of Russia. And we're going to be talking about each, ladies and gentlemen, as we go throughout this lecture. Okay? Now, really important for us to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that this relationship between the philosophers and the monarchs, was complicated. Some got along really well. Voltaire and Catherine the Great, they really enjoyed each other's company, really enjoyed their discussions, and they really had a back and forth of ideas of where, it wasn't just Voltaire influencing Catherine, but, you also had the monarch influencing the philosopher. But we also know that sometimes philosophers did not get along well with monarchs. Voltaire's another example of that, where he got kicked out of different countries and even exiled and put in jail. So the relationship was definitely complicated between the monarchs and the philosophers. Now, when it comes to these enlightened absolute rulers, ladies and gentlemen, it's also really important for us to understand that the motivations for why these absolute rulers are going to be making some reforms. Some of them are influenced by the Enlightenment, believe in the liberalism of the Enlightenment, believe in some of the humanitarian notions of these policies, but also there's another motive. There's multiple other motives that are a little bit more, how can I word it, tailored to help them, okay? More like, necessarily like selfish notions. And some of those, motives are going to come from strengthening their military, which is going to help them have more power, gaining more political power, gaining more money, the economic reform they're going to be seeing. The social reform is to gain more influence in the trust of the people. And so it's the big idea that I'm trying to get at, ladies and gentlemen, is that their motives are not necessarily just, fixated on the Enlightenment, of trying to make these reforms in the name of reason, of intellectual progress. There are multiple motives, and some of them are a little bit more, tailored towards helping that monarch in other ways, gaining power, increasing the military, making more money for their country, aka for themselves and for the crown. So there's some other motives that we need to be aware of. Okay, let's talk about Frederick the Great of Prussia, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, he is a great example of enlightened absolutism. He ruled for about 46 years, ladies and gentlemen, from 1740 to 1786. Frederick the Great, we know him. He's part of that Hohenzollern family, and you should be familiar with some of those other rulers that we've already talked about. Okay. And he had the loyalty of the military, he had the loyalty of the nobility, he had the loyalty of the clergy, he had the loyalty of the bureaucracy, and he had the loyalty of the intelligentsia, the intellectuals in his country. And because he had the loyalty of his subjects, and it was so strong, he was so popular. Okay, you don't become called Frederick the Great if you're not, very popular amongst your subjects and amongst other Europeans. He had the confidence to permit a more open discussion, and he was confident that, if he allowed some of these Enlightenment reforms to take place, that his country was not going to, rebel against him and revolt and he was not going to lose power. He was very confident in that, and that was because he had a great command of his country. And he invited numerous philosophers to his court. He invited Voltaire to his court, and so Frederick the Great is going to allow for some Enlightenment influence to come into his country of Prussia. And it's really important to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that Prussia is here. Prussia is becoming a power, and we are getting closer and closer and closer to a united Germany. We're only roughly 100 years away, right? And we know Prussia, and what we're going to be seeing in this lecture is the growth of Prussia, its prestige growing, its power growing, its land growing, and that power is going to continue to grow into the 1800s with OVB. All right, now let's talk about some of the reforms that Frederick the Great facilitates in Prussia. Now, he called himself the first servant of state. He was a politic. We know this about him. We talked a little bit about this before. He was a politic, and he put his country's interests before his own. And that's one of the reasons that he was such an effective and resilient leader in Prussia. And one of the things that he does, very much influenced by Voltaire, is he's going to allow for full religious toleration within his country. Prussia, northern Germany, is predominantly Lutheran. Well, Frederick is going to make some changes and allow for Jews and Catholics, even Muslims, and other religious communities to settle in his country. Now, part of his motivation does, yes, come from Voltaire and the Enlightenment notion of religious toleration. However, there are other motives, and I talked about that in the previous slide, that we need to be aware of. There are other motives for why he is doing this, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? He's going to streamline the law code. We see an influence by Beccaria. He wanted to integrate more rationality to the legal system, a more reasoned legal legal system and law code. He wanted to create a more efficient legal system, kind of eliminate regional differences. Like in one part of Prussia, you could get in trouble for a crime. Maybe in another part of Prussia, you can get in trouble for the same crime, but the punishment might be different. So he wanted to kind of make it more a national law code as opposed to having different regional differences. He's going to abolish torture, definitely from Beccaria, and limit the number of capital crimes. All right, and this is a big one, ladies and gentlemen. He is going to free the serfs from crown lands. All right. Now the serfdom is still going to be on the noble estates. Serfdom is going to be in full force. Okay, but Frederick's going to order the end of physical punishment to serfs, and let's talk about some of his motives for doing this. And I want to talk about some of his other motives for why he might be allowing for religious toleration and for freeing the serfs. Well, I wrote it right here. One of his motives for freeing the serfs is not necessarily out of the Enlightenment. It's that he needs soldiers for his army. He's going to be fighting some serious wars, the War of Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War. He's going to need soldiers, and that's a motive. Also, ladies and gentlemen, by allowing for religious toleration within his country, well, this is going to be very similar to what we saw in the Netherlands in the late 1500s and during the 1600s, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to see groups who are, persecuted, who fear persecution, are going to, go to his country, and that's going to allow for new ideas, talent, money, all right, but also workers and soldiers, all right? It's going to allow for more people to be in his country. So he's doing this, ladies and gentlemen, for a variety of reasons, and that's my main point. Is he's allowing for religious toleration. He's freeing the serfs. Okay, part influenced by the Enlightenment, part influenced by his own ambitions. All right, he's going to reduce censorship, so more freedom of expression that directly comes from Voltaire. All right, and he's encouraging immigration because he needs more workers, and he's encouraging people. Hey, you in Prussia, you can practice what you want, religiously. We won't persecute you. And that's encouraging immigration, encouraging people. And it's because he wants workers and he wants soldiers. He needs people. He's going to be needing definitely people for his wars. All right. And he's also going to be encouraging industrial and agricultural growth, which we will be talking about later on in Chapter 7. The agricultural revolution is going on. Industrialism is starting, ladies and gentlemen. Great Britain is starting to industrialize, and he's going to be trying to encourage this as well. Okay, now he's not going to industrialize on the scale or have the agricultural output on the scale that Great Britain will have, but he sees this. Okay, and he sees how this is benefiting Great Britain in multiple ways. All right. Now, his reforms, ladies and gentlemen, are not going to benefit the peasants. Okay, they're going to be taxed the most. And just because the serfs are being freed from their lands doesn't mean that their lives are going to get that much better. They're going to be pressed into service in the military, pressed into labor in other areas, and they're still going to be taxed the most, and still typically, they're not free from, they might be freed from crown lands, but they're still, most of the lower socioeconomic groups are still serfs and still working on noble lands. And most of these reforms are going to benefit the state in the form of having a larger workforce, a larger military, and help protect the nobles. Okay, the nobles will be benefiting from this as well. All right, we talked about this before, ladies and gentlemen, and I just want to reiterate the importance of this. Is that Frederick is that meritocracy is going to be vital within his government, ladies and gentlemen, and the idea of merit rather than privilege, that meritocracy. And Frederick is not going to create many new nobles. Okay, he's not going to do that. Why? Well, that would make the nobles that are the Junkers that are in Prussia very upset with him, and his relationship with them is very sensitive, right? We know this in Central and Eastern Europe that the monarchs are a little bit weaker. They need their nobles more, and they typically trade off, power. They take a little bit of power from the nobles, but give the nobles more power over peasants and serfs. And so Frederick is not going to create many new nobles because of that. But when he does, it's based on merit. And for many of the current nobles, if they want to ascend through his government, very similar to Peter the Great's table of ranks, if they want to ascend through the military, ascend through the government, gain a greater privilege, gain a greater rank, they have to do that based on merit, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so it's going to be really important. That's going to, like I said before, it's going to establish a culture of education. We're going to see Prussia have a very strong system of higher education, university system, colleges, and that's going to be really ingrained in their intellectual culture, the usefulness and the value of education. All right, just to kind of remind us about that meritocracy. All right, let's talk about the social structure of Prussia. The social structure of Prussia was very heavily stratified and structured. Serfs still tied to noble lands. The state does not recognize marriages between nobles and commoners. Nobles are not allowed to sell their lands to non-nobles. The middle class, it was extremely difficult to become a noble. Typically no one was permitted to enter the nobility, and Frederick does this on purpose. He is protecting the nobility. He is making the current nobles happy with his power. If they're happy with Frederick, okay, he's not going to have a problem with them. All right, and so there's a reason why this system exists, is to benefit the nobles and make sure that they are happy and unlikely to revolt or cause him troubles. All right, let's talk about his wars, ladies and gentlemen. Very important for us, his foreign policy, okay? And we're going to be talking about Frederick in the context first of the War of Austrian Succession. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, but I really want to go into a little bit more depth and review this, because this is a very important war for us, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Frederick is going to invade Silesia, part of the Austrian Empire, and he's gonna be the power who violates that pragmatic sanction, whereby the great powers recognize Charles VI's daughter, Maria Theresa, as empress. Okay, so this is gonna be a huge. He's just gonna violate. He's gonna be, I don't recognize you, and invade Silesia, and it's gonna start a giant war. Now, we're going to see France support Prussia in this, which is a pretty big policy shift, because we're seeing France support a major Germanic power. Well, their traditional enemy is the Habsburgs. We know that was a motive for them interfering on behalf of Martin Luther during those German Reformation wars, during the 30 Years' War, ladies and gentlemen. So France is going to support Prussia, but we're actually going to see them switch sides during the diplomatic revolution, but we'll get to that. And so that's actually and what we're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, is France really mismanaged some of their policies, and we'll get to this later on throughout the year. But this is going to be them mismanaging their policy with Prussia, because little do they know that Prussia, in 100 years, is going to create Germany, which is France's worst nightmare. All right. So Britain is going to join Austria's side to protect the Low Countries, but also to try to maintain a balance of power. Okay, Britain does not want things to get out of control. Prussia, to make a long story short, Prussia wins this war. We'll see the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. All right, Prussia will be able to keep Silesia, Prussia is definitely recognized as a great power. Spain is going to still control the slave trade gained from Britain during that Treaty of Utrecht for the War of Spanish Succession. But what's important about this war, ladies and gentlemen, this War of Austrian Succession, is Prussia is here. Prussia is making it known that they are here. They are a power. They are a major power in Europe, and we are getting closer. And in terms of the bigger picture here, the big story, we're getting closer to see a Germany. Okay, the German lands starting to unite, and that is Prussia. Prussia is growing. It will eventually help grow and facilitate the creation of a German empire. Okay, so just quickly to look at the map, ladies and gentlemen. So we have Prussia right here up in northern Europe, okay, and these northern Germanic lands up here, and territory over here, and just bits of territory over here. Eventually, this will be Germany, all right, and they take Silesia from the Austrian Empire. Okay. Now, we're going to see Maria Theresa want to run this thing back. All right, she wants to regain Silesia from Prussia, and she's going to gain Russia and France as allies. And their goal was to conquer Prussia and divide its territory among themselves. All right. Now, what's important about this 7 Years' War, ladies and gentlemen, is this is going to be a world war. We are going to see fighting on multiple fronts. We're going to see fighting in Europe, on the continental Europe. We're going to see fighting in the New World. This 7 Years' War is also called the French and Indian War for American history. And then we're also going to see fighting in Asia, in India. All right. And what we're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, is this diplomatic revolution of where everybody's going to kind of switch sides. We're going to see Britain ally with Prussia. Britain was traditionally an ally of Russia, but now they're going to be against them. And we're going to see France and Austria, traditional enemies, allies. So we're going to see the group switch side for a variety of reasons, and we are going to see the war commence. All right, so this is a world war, ladies and gentlemen. 7 years, okay, 1756 to 1763. All right, and this is going to be the bloodiest war in Europe since the 30 Years' War, and there is fighting on multiple fronts. Okay, so it's really interesting. People say World War I, the First World War. Not really. This is the 7 Years' War. It can be considered a world war because it's fought worldwide. And we're going to see fighting in North America, predominantly with the French and British, fighting on the continent, okay, fighting in the Caribbean, and fighting in India. All right, so just to kind of look at the map, this will be our kind of theaters of battle: America, Europe, and India. All right, let's continue. All right, now fighting on the continent, ladies and gentlemen, Prussia is going to be pretty much outnumbered, all right, 15-1. Berlin's going to be captured twice. And part of the reason is the British aren't going to bring the bulk of their army on the continent. Britain's actually, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the next slide, the next couple slides, is Great Britain is going to kind of be like, woo, swoop, and try to outmaneuver France. And Great Britain is, has different motivations for fighting this war. But Prussia's going to survive the continent, even though they're outnumbered 15-1. Number one, Great Britain's going to provide them lots of money, munitions, supplies, materials. And Russia, Tsar Peter the Third, greatly admired Frederick the Great, really liked him, and he's going to make peace with him, which is, going to allow Prussia to live to fight another day and survive while fighting the French and the Austrians. So that's going to allow Prussia to survive in this war, even though they are outnumbered 15-1. And the Treaty of Hubertusburg, not super important for us. The Treaty of Paris is a little bit more important for us. Is going to end this conflict with no significant changes in the borders. But what is important is the prestige of Prussia grew. Okay, Prussia, Frederick the Great is called Frederick the Great for a reason, and the Prussians are going to be very much considered legit now in Europe. They're like, whoa, okay, they were able to survive that. Yeah, so the Prussians are going to be their prestige very much grew within Europe. Okay, respect for them. All right, here's where Great Britain is really going to, gain a lot of power. All right, in the fighting in North America, and Great Britain is going to win some serious fights here. That are going to help them, and we're getting ready to see, ladies and gentlemen, this great expanse of the British Empire. We're getting ready to see, the British Empire, the sun that will never set on this empire of where they own like 20% of the world, and this is really going to help them. All right. The chief architect of this fighting and their success in the 7 Years' War will be a man named William Pitt. Now he was in Parliament, but he was not the Prime Minister. Another man was Thomas Pelham Hollis, the Duke of Newcastle, was the Prime Minister. But William Pitt was really running the show for the Prime Minister. He was the one, really the architect and the one who was pulling the strings to help Great Britain win in this war. Now, William Pitt, his real concern was North America, and he's going to use the conflict in Europe, Prussia, as a way to distract the French. And so he's really going to look like, he's going to make it look like he's going to invest heavily in the fighting and really come to the aid of Prussia. But instead, he's going to be like, whoop, and go, and he's going to go to North America and India. And this is where he's going to win some serious fights out here. He wanted all of the North American territory east of the Mississippi. He wants to take French territory in French Canada. He wants the Ohio River Valley. And so he's going to bring the large bulk of this is William Pitt, and the British are going to bring a large bulk of their army to fight the French in the New World. And they also had the help of their strong American colonies. And this is as we were talking about in class, this is one of the areas of where George Washington is going to learn. As he is a commander with the British, he is going to learn some tactics to help later on in the American Revolution defeat the British. He's going to be watching how the natives fight. Each country, Great Britain and France, have allies and native indigenous communities who are helping them. And George Washington is going to be looking at the warfare that the natives engage in. And learn a lot. For example, the kind of the hit and run tactics. Not fighting out in the open field, like the British and the French typically do, and that's going to be really helpful, ladies and gentlemen, for George Washington when he engages with the British in the American Revolution. But the bigger picture for us in the 7 Years' War, ladies and gentlemen, is that France is not going to be able to commit the resources, and they are going to lose here big time. All right. So it's a decisive victory for the British in North America, and we will also see the British, have victories in the West Indies, the Caribbean, and in India. And this is going to be really important for us, ladies and gentlemen, because we are going to start to see Great Britain consolidate and start to gain control in India, and that will be the crown jewel of their empire. Very important for us as we get into we'll get into imperialism in the 1800s. And so, actually, when the British lose the American colonies, they're not going to be that worried about that. They're not going to be happy about that, but they're not going to be that worried about that because they have India, and that's where they're going to be making a lot of money, and that's where they're going to be really focused on consolidating control. But these worldwide successes are unprecedented, and we're going to see the Treaty of Paris of 1763 end the fighting. All right, now. And there's a couple really important implications from this. Great Britain is going to receive a lot of territory in the New World. Okay, France will gain some of their territory, but Great Britain is definitely going to benefit from this treaty. Okay, Great Britain is now really projecting not just European strength, not just strength on the oceans, but now a global strength. We're seeing Great Britain become not just the preeminent European power, but a world global power. And that's really important, and that's going to be really important for us because we're going to see Great Britain slowly start to, grow out this empire that is going to be so vast. All right, let's talk about the effects of the 7 Years' War, ladies and gentlemen. This was a worldwide conflict, and Prussia definitely benefited. They were able to keep Silesia, and they're now considered their own formidable European and world power. All right, the Habsburgs are going to be relying more on their interior power, and the Habsburgs have taken an L. All right, Maria Theresa is not going to be able to get that territory back, and we're seeing now Prussia kind of overshadow the Austrian Habsburg Empire. But Great Britain is definitely truly a world power, and they are definitely the power of Europe. Now, we're going to see Great Britain, and it's going to be all hands on deck because we are getting ready to see the French Revolution and Napoleon. And Napoleon's really going to challenge not just Great Britain, but Europe as a whole. But Great Britain definitely is powerful. All right. France is going to take a big L from this, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to lose a lot of their overseas territory. And as I showed you all in the map in class, we looked at that French Canada, that area around the Mississippi. That is all, they're going to lose that, ladies and gentlemen. And then eventually we're going to see France really get rid of the rest of their overseas territory in the Americas with the Louisiana Purchase. And we'll see Napoleon do that. The major implications for this war, ladies and gentlemen, I want people to take really good notes on this and understand this, is that this 7 Years' War is going to have deep financial implications for France and Britain. Okay? For France, the implications are going to be just out of control. They're going to be so in debt from this war, and that's going to help facilitate the French Revolution. And this loss also convinced many that the need for reform was there. Also, ladies and gentlemen, really important is that France is going to continue on this path to debt because they're going to help the American colonists in the American Revolution. So France is in debt, and this is a big problem for them because, as we know, ladies and gentlemen, the first and second estates, they don't pay taxes. Only the third estate pays taxes. And so how is the Bourbon monarchy going to gain revenue to get out of this debt? We're going to talk about that in the French Revolution. They got a big problem, okay? But this debt from the 7 Years' War and the following American Revolution, big problem for France. Same thing for Britain, the debt, okay? They're in debt. They need money to help pay for the war, and they're going to be looking to the American colonies to pay for that. And as we'll talk about a little bit in some of the following chapters, that will facilitate the American Revolution. No taxation without representation. That's going to be a big problem for them. All right. Let's stop here, ladies and gentlemen, for right now. I will make a second part to this lecture, and we're going to be talking about Maria Theresa, Joseph II, and kind of finishing up this lecture about Enlightened Absolutism. All right, thank you so much.